ये वाली ना मैंने नहीं भेजी, भेज दो। हाँ हाँ, यस यस। शिखा के
In 2002, in the first India Today International Conclave, some of the finest minds from politics, media, business, and diplomacy gathered together to deliberate upon India's future prospects as a global giant. Our former president and visionary, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, weighed our position and confidently remarked, and I quote, "Today, India is in the knowledge age, which provides an opportunity to become a developed nation with a strong economy." In the book India 2020, A Vision for the New Millennium, Dr. Kalam and Y.S. Rajan assessed India's strengths and weaknesses to outline the ambitious goal of India being a developed nation. Fast forward to 2047, the 100th anniversary of India's independence and achieving the status of a developed nation remains a significant task. So here we are, gathered together from different parts of the globe to discuss and ponder, agree and disagree, debate and infer, but most importantly, come together with the singleness of purpose to the vision of Viksit Bharat that is reiterated in the sentiments of millions of Indians who are tirelessly working towards the sole desire of putting India in the League of Developed Countries. I, Dr. Purvi Medatwal, on behalf of St. Xavier's College, Jaipur, take this opportunity to welcome our honored guests, dignitaries, delegates, academics, entrepreneurs, scholars, and students. I request the dignitaries to kindly take their seats on the stage. It is our privilege to welcome our eminent chief guest and keynote speaker, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, member, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. We also welcome our esteemed resource persons. We welcome the management, Reverend Father Arokya Swami S.J., Rector and Manager, St. Xavier's College, Jaipur, Reverend Father Professor S. Xavier S.J., Principal, Reverend Father Raymond Kerubin S.J., Vice Principal, Reverend Father M. Amaldas S.J., Dean Research and Development, Reverend Father Abraham Amalraj, and Dr. Madhu Sharma, Director, Xavier's Institute of Management and Informatics. Professor Rajendra Gupta, in his book, Rebuilding India in the Next 25 Years, Tough Choices and Hard Decisions, put forth the concept of Viksit Bharat. Viksit Bharat at 2047 is the vision of the Government of India and represents a complete blueprint for making India a developed nation by 2047, the 100th year of its independence. The vision encompasses various aspects of development, including economic growth, social progress, technological advancements, environmental sustainability, and good governance. As India stands at this crucial juncture, poised to take off its growth trajectory, it is important to realize that tremendous potential India has. There is enormous work that needs to be undertaken in the mission mode to make India Viksit Bharat by 2047. To achieve such a transformation, it would require the concerted efforts of government, private sector, civil society, and the active participation of the citizens of India. For this to happen, there is a need to chalk out a bold, ambitious, and transformative vision plan which will give a clear roadmap to achieve this challenging target in the next 23 years. With this objective in mind, we have a galaxy of speakers from various domains joining us for this two-day conference. Shri Sanjeev Sanyalji, Member, Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister. Father Professor John Joseph, Sofia University, Japan. Mr. Rajiv Poddar, Managing Director and Founder, Knowledge Capsules, Kolkata. Professor E. Somnathan, Indian Statistical Institute, Delhi. Professor Rohini Somnathan, Delhi School of Economics, Delhi. Professor Rajiv Sijaria, Dean, Atal Bihari Vajpayee School of Management, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Professor Pradeep Trikha, former Dean, Mohanlal Sukhadia University, Udaipur, and visiting professor, University of Münster, Germany. Professor Vinish Kumar Kathuria, Director, Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur. Professor Meeta Mathur, University of Rajasthan. Dr. Nilanjan Dey, Associate Professor, Techno International, New Town, Kolkata. Dr. Tannen Neil Lincoln, Assistant Professor, St. Joseph's University, Bangalore. Dr. Shruti Sivaraman, Assistant Professor, Kristu Jayanti College, Bangalore. Dr. Tanushri Sharma, Manipal University, Jaipur. And Mr. Shubham Sharma, Research Scholar at the Department of Political Science, University of Connecticut, USA. Having such a diverse array of speakers from various domains is instrumental in achieving our objective. Light breaks where no sun shines, because this is the infinite presence dispelling darkness and spreading warmth and hope. May we request the dignitaries on the dais to please light the ceremonial lamp as a symbol of hope that springs eternal in human breast. In keeping with the spirit, it is time we extend green greetings to our guests as a tiny gesture of expressing voluminous gratitude to our guests for consenting to be with us as we come together to rethink, restructure, and reinvent ways and means to become a developed nation. I request Reverend Father Aroke Swami S.J., Rector and Manager, St. Xavier's College, Jaipur, and our Principal, Reverend Father Professor S. Xavier, to offer a green sapling to our Chief Guest and Keynote Speaker, Shri Sanjeev Sanyalji, Member, Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister, as a symbol of our vow to support Mother Earth in becoming a better place for generations to come. Our principal, Reverend Father Professor S. Xavier S.J., is a leader who knows how to encourage and inspire others. Because a true leader does not believe in the growth of self, but believes in helping others grow. The greatest leader is not necessarily the one who does the greatest things. He's the one that gets the people to do the greatest things. It is time that we put our hands together for our principal as I invite him to deliver the welcome address.
Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, into the dearly desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee. In that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake, are the lines from the Son of the Soil of Sonar Bangla, Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate. And today, to represent his presence from Sonar Bangla is none other than Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who is with us. A phone call from Jaipur St. Xavier's. With that freedom and joy of inviting a Xaverian of Calcutta St. Xavier's School, I said, as a former pupil of our institution, of an alma mater, St. Xavier's College, principal of Jaipur, I invite you, extend your warm welcome, sir. We need your presence amongst us to enlighten that topic of the government of Viksit Bharat 2047. Immediate came the word, yes, Father, I am there. A bit of date changes we did for his convenience. A person on the move, just returned from Stanford University lectures, a day of rest, immediately he is here with us. Sir, I would like to thank you for your generosity for being with us. The second hallmark of a Xaverian is punctuality. Though when Yash sir told him tomorrow morning 8:30 will be picked up from your hotel, he said we work late night, 8:30 may be too early for me, but the Xaverian was here at 9:22 a.m. in the campus to represent to us at 9:30 a.m. for the inauguration. That's the hallmark punctuality that Sir has today taught to us. Once learned as a Xaverian, we rarely forget that good quality within us. And the third aspect, when the government was talking about minimum government, maximum governance, and put the system in place so that the nation will on its own wheels, will move towards development, was that concept called Viksit Bharat. Jaipur, St. Xavier's take the lead in the country, first time to be participant in that aspirations of the Prime Minister of the country, enhanced by the Economic Advisory Council like Mr. Sanjeev Sanyalji. And it's not any other expectation that we can have beyond to the person who is in that part of the vision plan of the country. Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, we are very grateful to you. These are a group of students who have given you a special audience today. He was asking me what kind of audience will they be. I said there will be undergraduates, postgraduates, MBA graduate students who are well versed in this topic to listen to you. The great visionary who has made his time possible to be amidst us. And I'm grateful to you, my fellow beloved students. I know you will get your special attendance, but when you return after these 2 days, you will also go with your special inputs about how you will be part of that growth engine of this country. That's our joy. That's the beauty of organizing such a multidisciplinary concept to be brought in by all the departments, whether arts, humanities, psychology, science, economics, or mathematics or management. A topic which is close to our hearts, close to the future development of the country, that you have become part of it as not audience, as participants and active, dynamic citizens of this country. You will take this home forward. It will not stop, but you will be part of that growth process. For that, I welcome you. I welcome Sanjeev sir and all the dignitaries on stage for providing this platform for being part of that growth plan of this nation building. Have a wonderful 2 days of interaction, experience, and go with that ideas of development, how I can be part of that development of this nation. Thank you one and all. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful conference. God bless us all.
I would now like to introduce Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, a distinguished personality. Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji is currently a member of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Economic Advisory Council. He was the principal economic advisor to the Finance Minister for 5 years till February 2022. He has represented India on many international forums, including as co-chair of the G20's Framework Working Group. During his time in government, he has been responsible for several key reforms and was part of the core team that managed the Indian economy during the COVID-19 pandemic. He was also one of the key architects of the G20's Global Action Plan that kept the world economy functioning during the pandemic years. Prior to joining the government, he spent over 2 decades in financial markets and was global strategist and managing director at Deutsche Bank. An alumnus of Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi, Mr. Sanyal later attended Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. He was awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship in 2007 for his work on urban dynamics. In 2010, he was named as Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in Davos. He has been a visiting professor and fellow of numerous institutions such as Oxford University, Royal Geographical Society, Institute of Policy Studies Singapore, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He also chairs the Board of Advisors of the Delhi School of Public Policy and Governance at Delhi University. Mr. Sanyal is the author of a number of best-selling books, including Revolutionaries, Land of Seven Rivers, The Ocean of Churn, India in the Age of Ideas, The Incredible History of the Indian Ocean, and the India Renaissance. He has also published around 250 articles and columns in leading national and international publications. His writings have received many awards, including the Kalinga Book Award in 2023, the International Indian Achievers Award for Literature in 2013, and the Art Karat Award in 2018, and so on. I humbly request Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji to deliver the inaugural address.
You got a laptop, yeah, and it's connected through. No, it's a change. Okay, so it's not done that way.
Changing from the, when you are changing,
Hmm.
you will be changing. It will be changing from there.
Okay, so you
It is connected to that computer.
so you need to put this on the screen.
You only change as per you are changing.
Okay. Okay.
Your control, that's also under your control.
Okay. Thank you so much. Just wait for me to get that. Good morning, Zavarians. Father Rector, Father Principal, Father Vice Principal, faculty, and students of St. Xavier's, Jaipur. It's indeed a pleasure to be back in a Xaverian institution. As Father Xavier mentioned, I am a Xaverian but not from college. I am from a school, that's St. Xavier's Collegiate School in Kolkata, which, as some of you may know, is one of the oldest educational institutions in the country, going back to the mid-19th century. And wonderful to be here. Let me also say that along with the other things of punctuality and many other things that I've learned, today I have also learned from Father Xavier about persistence, because he was very clear and persistent on making sure that I got here, despite the fact that I had to juggle quite a lot of things in my schedule. In fact, my schedule is somewhat more complicated than the one you pointed out. I had gone to, I think it was to Bangalore, then I went to Stanford, then I came back and went to Mumbai, then I had a day free of rest, and then I've come here. So a lot more complicated than that. Anyway, so we happen to live today at a particularly important turning point in our history of our country. And as many of you may be aware, we are now seeing we are now in a position to say it categorically that we are the world's fastest growing economy. So much so that we will go from being the 5th largest economy, which we already are, to becoming, in the next 24 to 36 months at most, the world's 3rd largest economy. We'll go first past Japan and then past Germany. Of course, we'll still be a very poor country because we will be the world's 3rd largest economy with the world's largest population. So once you divide one by the other, on per capita terms, we'll still be quite poor. But nonetheless, we will be certainly better off than we are today. The government will have a lot more resources in its hands to make more infrastructure spending, do more projects for supporting the very poor, and whatever other things that we want to do with government resources. And of course, there are some benefits from just being big. You can negotiate in a completely different way in trade deals. You can reposition ourselves in the global geopolitical arena in a totally different way. And that effort, of course, does not happen naturally. It happens because you have to put in the effort of investing and continuously reforming your economy. So I want to make this point right in the beginning. This is not about doing one bunch of reforms in the beginning and then sitting back and somehow naturally you become a bigger economy. There is a lot of continuous effort that needs to be made to just keep this economy running, far from getting it to actually grow. And along the way, you will get all kinds of shocks. I mean, COVID, for example, you lose 2 full years to a random shock, which was not our fault, but you have to deal with it. Other things will happen, wars will happen in other parts of the world, hopefully not with us ourselves, but even that has an impact. Then, there will be weather changes, all kinds of things can happen. So this is the act of getting growth going has to be earned. Now, reforms is something we have now been doing since 1991, and it has had a lot of benefit. But most of the conversation that we have about reforms is usually about very big reforms. So, that's why very often you'll hear the word structural reforms. What is structural reforms? Structural reforms is when you change the structure of something, change the framework. And of course, those are what are popular. So if you switch off the light a little bit, they'll be able to see maybe can you see the slides clearly? Okay. So I'm going to talk actually about something else, because structural reforms, everybody talks about. You know about GST introduction. You know about insolvency and bankruptcy code. These were very important structural changes. The GST, for example, before you had GST, every state had its own indirect tax system. So those of you may not remember this. At every state border, you had to stop and pay effectively some sort of a customs duty. And you can imagine how inefficient it was. It was actually more difficult for Mumbai to trade with Delhi than it was for Mumbai to trade with China and Shanghai, because it had to go through so many state blocks and so on. So when we introduced GST in 2017, we effectively signed a free trade agreement with ourselves. And that has really structurally changed the economy. Similarly, when we introduced the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, we changed the structure of creative destruction in the economy. We could finally shut down companies that were not going to succeed, sell off the assets and start again, liquefy the system. Similarly, when we introduced the inflation targeting framework in 2016, I think it was, we changed the way our monetary policy was run. So India, before this was introduced, was a high inflation country, not in the Argentina sense of the word, but we were a country that was used to having 8 to 12% inflation. Since we introduced this, we have by and large managed to hold inflation in the 2 to 6% range. That's a 600 basis point reduction in our underlying inflation rate. Not bad. So these have been successful, but these are big changes that most of you will be aware of or will read about and academics will write about. So people know that these changes happen. But there's another type of change that not many people think about, which is actually process reform. And I'm going to talk about process reform because these are basically about small nuts and bolts changes in the process. Here the structure of the thing is not changed. Basically all you're trying to do is to make this system a little more efficient or a lot more efficient even, but in the same structure. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Unfortunately, these nuts and bolts reforms are not considered too cool, and even very often, other than people who are in these sectors, very often don't even know about them. So I'm going to give you a flavor of this change because the cumulative impact of this may be just as large, if not larger, than structural reform. Now, many of you here are MBA students and probably, very likely, you are taught something called business process reengineering. You're taught this, is there a course in your MBA class called business process reengineering? No? Okay, never mind, many MBA courses teach this, but in any case, it's something that businesses do routinely. They re-engineer their processes to make them more efficient. And there's a huge literature on this subject. Unfortunately, for some reason, this business process re-engineering literature is almost entirely missing for governments. For some reason, there's an assumption that governments don't need the same thing, but they do. So how do you go about doing this? Well, the first thing to do is to look at something that is inefficient in the system. Identify something. It could be the way the KYC works or some sector works or there's an irrelevant process. So identify a reform. Then important, you document the as-is process. In other words, you map the process. Then you do process analysis to identify what is the exact issue. Very often you will find that 90% of the problem actually is one or two things in that process. So it's very important to find out what those are. Then you have to change it. Change those so that those bottlenecks get cleaned up. And most importantly, you then have to monitor the new process to see whether actually the change that you wanted to need happened and that you did not get negative unintended consequences. So one of the major things you've got to remember, particularly in policy making, that you may solve your problem but create 3 other problems. So there is monitoring. Now, with this framework, I will now talk about 6 different kinds of process reforms. The one is streamlining of existing administrative process. So you take whatever is given, the same rules, everything, just make it work better. 2, you change the regulations given within the given law. 3rd, you go back to Parliament or the State Assembly to change the law. 4th, you add capacity at some level of government where there is a bottleneck, where there is not enough capacity. 5th, you remove requirement of a state mandated activity. And finally, you actually close or restructure an outdated government agency. All of these, if you discover some another new one, I'll happily add it to the presentation. I just invented all of these myself. So, since there's, as I said, no literature on this, so that's how it is. So I'll start with giving an example of each one of them. I'll start with one that you're probably reasonably aware of, so that just to warm you up. This relates to administrative streamlining of the way in which benefits are given to the people who derive it. It could be from various schemes, whatever the reason may be. There is a certain amount of resources, money, whatever, some facility that the government, in this case the government of India, wants to give to somebody. It may be the poor, it may be somebody with disability, whatever the reason they are giving it. Now notice here, the debate here is not about who to give it to or how much to give. I'm not debating that. All I am looking at is whether or not that money is reaching the bottom. And this was a very serious issue till very recently. There was a planning commission report. So there was a planning commission in 2005, which found that 58% of the subsidized food grains issued by the central pool did not reach the targeted beneficiaries because of identification errors, non-transparent operation. Basically, another way of saying that it was stolen. And that out of 1 rupee worth of income transfer that happened, only 27 paise reached the poor. Now, let me point this out, that this was an improvement on what used to happen in the late 80s, where only 15 paisa used to reach the bottom, as the then famous comment by then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So even after improvement, many changes, this was where we were at. So it was decided, one of the early things that this government did was to create a system of direct benefit transfer. Why not get the money into the bank accounts of the beneficiary directly? So, in order to do that, a triangulation was created between the Aadhaar number, which everybody now has, linking it to their mobile phone, and then linking it to a bank account. Now, many of these people who I'm dealing with here for benefit transfers do not have a bank account. So a no-frills bank account called the Jan Dhan account was also created. So this was called the JAM Trinity. And by triangulating these three, you could do many interesting things. First of all, you could simply weed out large numbers of fake accounts and non-beneficiaries out of this. So in March 2022, it was estimated that just from weeding out, not other things, just from weeding out non-beneficiaries, you saved about 2.7 trillion rupees. That's 2.7 lakh crores. Which meant a weeding out of 42 million fake ration cards under the PDS system. That's 50% of the total. Removal of 41 million fake beneficiaries under the LPG Pahel scheme. Deletion of duplicate beneficiaries under Manrega. And you know, these are huge proportions, as you can see. I've given the data there. And I'm not even talking about how much money got, these were fake duplicate beneficiaries. I'm not talking about how much real beneficiaries had money siphoned off till it reached them. So as a result of which, suddenly the DBT system became radically more efficient. Monies began hitting people's bank accounts. In fact, this was very critical in allowing us to provide a safety net during the COVID period as well, as some of you will remember. So this is just one example. This is actually a relatively well-documented example. I've just given this to you just to give an example of a type of process reform. But it is a peculiar type of process reform where, remember, no laws were changed, no regulations were changed. It's the same thing that existed before. We just did it better. Now I'm going to move on to another type. These are all the data. Sorry, I should keep changing this one. Now, this is about regulations that have, for whatever reason, causing major inefficiencies, and you need to remove them or change them in some way. I'm going to use an example that I myself had something to do with. This relates to the IT BPO sector. Now, till about 3 years ago, the IT BPO sector used to be covered under some completely ridiculous laws and rules and regulations under something called the Revised Terms and Conditions of the Other Service Provider 2008 regulations. Okay. Now, BPO, ITO, these IT-enabled services, in the legal parlance, they are called other service providers. And for reasons best understood by those who came up with these laws, it had these strange requirements. First and foremost, there was no clear definition of OSPs. So anybody really working from home using telecom line, obviously we are using some sort of telecom system, could be actually defined as an OSP. And you had to get a permission from the telecom department to do this activity. So before 2021, if you were all working from home, I'm afraid to tell you that you are all doing something illegal technically. Because unless, of course, some of you actually went to the trouble of getting special permission from the telecom department, all of you were being illegal things. Next, then it said that not only did you have to get permission, you had to have an EPA BX machine in your basement in order at every location in which you worked. So if you worked at home, you needed an EPA BX machine, and then if you happened to go to the cafe and were working from there, it's okay to browse the net. It's only if you're working. But if you suddenly began doing some work, then you needed an EPA BX machine in the cafe. You also needed a separate registration for every OSB. So if you happen to work for Infosys or something and you were working at some other location, it was not good enough that Infosys or TCS, etc. had a registration. Each location, so even the cafe needed to be registered separately with the OSP. And then you had completely crazy regulation that the domestic and international OSPs had to be kept separate. So imagine this situation that there is a back office system for, say, Singapore Airlines for their ticketing that is operating out of, say, Noida. Now there is an Indian national who lives in Singapore, who buys a ticket in Singapore, comes to India and discovers some problem with their ticketing. Now, is this person a domestic passenger or is he an international passenger? In any case, when he calls the BPO, how does the BPO know who is this passenger? And if you got it wrong, the telecom department had the right to fine you. So you can imagine the extent to which all of this meant that there was a great amount of harassment, rent seeking, delays, you name it. And, you know, we are all very proud of our IT, BPO sector, but this was a major source of problems for the IT. And they tried very hard to try and solve it before 2020, but they failed. Now, I'm not from this sector, but I was then in the finance ministry as the principal economic advisor, and I discovered this problem purely by chance. It turned out that when the COVID lockdown was introduced, the telecom ministry came out with a notification saying that these OSP regulations were going to be held in abeyance till the end of the year, in recognition of the fact that people had to work from home. Now, whenever a notification like this comes out, I have worked long enough in the government that I get extremely suspicious. Because it basically what that ministry is doing is not giving you some space and giving you a shoot. Basically what it is doing is signaling to you that all you fellows have been getting away with not complying, but these laws actually do apply. So yes, after December, these things will go back to applying to you. That is what they were actually trying to state. So since as I said, I'm a suspicious sort of chap, I discovered this and I decided to take it up. It took quite a struggle. It took many months of arguing with the bureaucracy, taking it up and down the system to the political leadership, etc. Till finally, till finally I managed to changed these rules. So basically what we did is, we first got a clear definition of an OSP. This was first done in November 2020, and then further clarification, I had to do it in 2 rounds. I got a further clarification in June 2021. And the end result was, there was now a clear definition of OSPs as basically those who are doing voice-based BPO services. So it now applied only to a very tiny number of people. In any case, voice-based services are dying. Everybody is using data. So effectively now, OSPs don't really apply to anybody or a very small group of people. Secondly, we allowed for interconnectivity and infrastructure sharing across OSPs, and you didn't need to have EPA BX machine in every location. You could legally now load things onto the cloud or load things onto servers somewhere where you were not. You could work from home and remote locations. Now, we actually had to change the law. This is as recently as 2021, which allowed all of this. And the removal of the distinction between domestic and international OSPs. Okay, so we did all of this as recently as this. And look at what happens as a result. A survey at the end of December 2021 found that 92% of OSPs found that their compliance burden had gone down. So almost every person working in this IT BPO sector had compliance burdens come down. And for something like 28% of them, compliance burden declined by 50%. So this is, and 50 or more percent, sorry. So the point I'm making to you is a very simple reform, removing of completely useless regulations, which had no role, which even in 2008 when they were introduced were already outdated. That once it got done, you can see how it lightens the load on an entire sector. And of course, improves our competitiveness in this sector. Next, let me now show you. So that was where a regulation was changed, but note, no law was changed. But sometimes you have to go back and change the law as well. Now I'm going to give you an example of something that is live. So this change hasn't happened. I'm still fighting for this change. This relates to something called the Legal Metrology Act of 2009. Now, let me see how many of you even know what legal metrology is. How many of you know who is legal metrology? Nobody in this room knows what legal metrology is, and yet you live your lives by it. It is the laws by which weights, measures, and labels are run. Every country in the world will have some laws. These are all the Legal Metrology Act. When you look at it, when you buy something, there's at the back, tells the weights, it says what it contains. All of this is legal metrology. Now, this law is in fact the source of it is the second largest source of small time bribery and rent seeking in the government, both state and central, particularly at the state level. Why? Because the way the law is set up, it allows for large amount of skimming by legal metrology inspectors. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you. Just in case you are asking what is the biggest source, it's of course traffic laws. I'm sure you've all had to experience that. But the second largest is legal metrology, and let me show how this is done and why this happens. It happens because the law has been set up in such a way that on your first offense, you have to pay a very small fine. But on your second offense, you can be sent to jail for as long as 7 years. Okay, so now let me show you what happens as a result of this. Look at the table at the bottom. I hope you can see it. Effectively, what happens is that the legal metrology guys go and catch a businessman, a tradesman, or whatever, entrepreneur, shopkeeper, whoever he happens to find, and catches them for making some very minor deviation. So, and this is, by the way, not uncommon because the laws, legal metrology laws between states are how they are defined, labels, etc., are sometimes quite different. So in some states, gram should be G, somewhere it has to be fully gram, somewhere it has to be GM. So they'll find some small error you made, spelling mistake, you spelt it in the American way, something like that. And you will be told that you have made a mistake, the first offense, and you will be asked to pay a small fine. Now, most businessmen, unless they know what is going on, they will pay that fine, 1,000 rupees. Why get into a debate? Pay the 1,000 rupees. But once you have paid that 1,000 rupees, you are their slave forever, because now you can be sent to jail for up to 7 years for a second. So you can see what happens as the numbers for that. You can see the number of cases booked under the first case is up to 1 lakh cases. And I have data up to 2021, 22. I should add the new one as well. But it's somewhere in the range of 1.2 lakhs to 70,000. That's the range of cases. But the number of second cases, as you can see, is 12, 5, 3, 11. So what is going on? You see, when I showed this data to the Consumer Affairs Ministry, their thinking was, look, it's such a successful thing. Once somebody has made an error, they never do an error again. No, that is not what is happening at all. What is happening is that the inspectors are bringing people into the net. And then after that, they have no intention of taking them to the second, actually booking them under the second thing. Because then once they book them, there is no rent seeking at all. It is the threat of the second that is where the rent seeking happens. So this is what goes on. So an effort is now being made to change this under the Jan Vishwas bill. One part of this has been changed. Some of the worst examples of this have now been changed in the Jan Vishwas Act, which just happened a few months ago. But unfortunately, still the sections 30, 33 and 36, which account for 80% of the problems, are still criminalized. And I'm on the job trying to change this as well. Now I'm going to show you another area. Now, these were about changing things that are inefficient. But there are areas where actually you need to add government as well. So here is an area where you need to add state capacity. So we all know about intellectual property rights. Everybody agrees we want to be knowledge economy, compete in the world, etc. Now, one of the key platforms of that is to obviously have patents and trademarks and things like this, right? Now, let me show you the problem here with our patenting system. Similar things can be talked about trademarks, etc. I'm just talking about patents. So you can see that in the year 2016, India used to grant only 9,847 patents a year. Okay, for a country our size, till 7 years ago, we were granting not even 10,000 patents. In the same year, China granted over 4 lakh patents, and the US granted over 3 lakh patents. How are you going to compete with them? Yeah. Now, I will grant that a lot of Chinese patents are rubbish. But even if you take their decent patents, it's still in a different level from us. Now, after 2016, we began to improve things, and in 22, we did about 34,000 patents, and I think the data for 23 will come, we did about 50,000 patents. So that's a dramatic improvement from where we used to be just 7 years ago. But notice what happens in the meanwhile in China. The number of patents in China has gone up to 8 lakhs. And the US has also gone now to 3.25 lakhs. So the point I'm making to you is that yes, we have made a lot of progress in recent times, but this is not good enough. So we began to improve things in various processes and so on. So now those of you who have ever done a patent will know there are 2 levels to a patent. The first level is the preliminary examination, which is called the examiner level. And then it goes to the higher level, where it's the controller level, which is the proper inspection. And then you get your grant. So starting 2017-18, we began to improve our processes, etc. at the examiner level. And the amount of backlog we had, as you can see, the red bar came down very dramatically. Now look at what actually happened. Did that improve the granting of patents? A little bit, yes. But for the most part, what it did is that it just meant that it all piled up at the controller level. You can see the red bar on the other side. I'm just going to show you. Sorry, I hadn't changed this slide. So it comes down dramatically and the other one just goes up. So all we have done is the traffic jam has shifted. That's all that happened. So why does this happen? Why aren't we able to compete? Is it because our patent office people are inefficient? But we did a research of this and discovered that our guys were not too bad. The real problem was that China had 13,500 patent officers, the US had 8,300, and we, after a lot of hiring, have only 900. So it's a cricket match in which we do not even have one player and the other guy has 13 players. Now obviously you're going to lose. So we have now dramatically increasing the number of patent officers. As we speak, another 500 are being added. And the course of the next couple of years, we are going to add to the number of patent officers quite dramatically across India. Maybe take it to about 2,500 or thereabouts. And that will, as you can imagine, enhance our capacities dramatically. The idea is in the next 24 months to take the number of Indian patents granted to over 1 lakh. Now, it'd still be less than what China and US does, but at least we are now in the game. So in case there are people in this room who want to take up patenting as a profession, either in the government patenting office or in the private sector or wherever, this is a big, big area. Patenting, patent law, the science of patent, the scientific aspects of patenting and so on. Please consider this if this interests you. Now I'm coming to yet another area. So that was about adding capacity. Now this is about actually removing a state mandated activity. This activity may be in the government. It may be also outside the government. And I'm going to give you an example again of a live case that I am trying to push for, which is to remove an extra process which was introduced relatively recently, 2015, by this government only, in order to make it more efficient. Now, to understand this, you need to first understand what mediation is. See, mediation is a pre-litigation process by which before two parties who are in dispute go to court and begin litigating, you encourage them to sit with a mediator and mediate amongst themselves or hopefully come to some consensus so that they don't, that matter ends there. Mediated and ends there and doesn't go into the courts. As it is, our court system is completely jammed up. We don't want any more cases there. Now, this is a good concept. I have no problem. The problem arises because when the new law for Commercial Courts Act was introduced in 2015, they made it actually mandatory for everybody to go through this process before ending up in the court. Now, it may seem like a sensible thing to do at first glance. You say, make every mediate first before you get into the court, at least try and mediate. But in fact, what is the data suggest about the success of this? So in order to look into this, we got data from two commercial courts in Mumbai. Mumbai is our commercial capital, so we went to the commercial courts there and looked at the data of how successful was this mediation process. And we found that it was only successful in about 1% of the cases. In 98% of the cases, the parties were so disgusted and annoyed with each other, they refused to come to the mediation. They just paid the fees or paid the rest thing and then turn up. Out of the 2% that they did turn up, 1% worked and the other percent didn't. So for 99% of the cases, this mediation process doesn't work. And yet, they are compulsorily made to go through this process, which means that they spent an extra 6 months as added to the litigation process. They pay for lawyers through that process. They pay the mediator through that process. It's a complete waste of time and money. And yet there is really very difficult to escape it. And even escaping it requires you to use further lawyers. So here we have created a state mandated process which lawyers love, of course, because effectively this is a license permit, right? You're forced to go through their hands for 6 extra months. So they love this. And when I raise this issue that this should be removed, they all get all very antsy about the whole matter. But this is an example of rent seeking by lawyers. I mean, I've criticized the bureaucrats quite a lot, but in fact, everybody given a chance likes to seek rent. And this is a good example of that. Now, I want to clarify here, I have no problem with mediation as such. But the fact is that like any process, it has to earn its place in the system. If it is good and the mediators are good, people will come to them naturally. If, however, you give them a license and you have to go through their process, then they have no incentive to improve the quality of their service. It's a bit like the pre-1991 India. You know, if the only 2 cars in India are the Ambassador and the Fiat, they have no reason to upgrade their services. Same thing has happened with mediation. They have no incentive to improve their services. So this is something I'm now fighting to try and change. Now I've got to get a lawyer to write an alternative law. Now finally, the type 6. This relates to merging, closing, restructuring outdated government agencies and services. Now, like any institution or government in the world, institutions of all kinds are created. After a while, they run out of whatever their original use was. Unfortunately, unless you actually pay attention and shut it down, it's going to hang around forever. And there are lots of such bodies in the government of India that are outdated and have outlived their usages. So I had done few years ago a survey of autonomous bodies of the central government alone, and there are about 850 of them. And I'm not even counting departments and things. These are inside ministries. These are autonomous bodies. And this is only of the central government. So if you take state governments and other levels of government, they run into thousands. And large numbers of them, running into hundreds, are actually defunct organizations. They're not, some are outdated, but some of them may have never been very useful. Because they were set up because, some politician wanted to do something, or some bureaucrat wanted to create a post-retirement job for himself, whatever the reason may be. These random organizations were created and they fester around in the system forever, getting government funding, squatting on large amounts of government land. You as taxpayers are paying their salaries and so on. And they never get shut down. So in the last few years, I've been a part of a major effort to identify these institutions and shut them down. So, for example, we have shut down the All India Handloom Board, the All India Handicraft Board, and so on. This doesn't mean that we don't care about handloom and handicraft. There are large numbers of institutions that are already doing it. We just have a plethora of extra institutions doing these things. We have to unify them. We used to have Films Division, Director of Film Festival, National Film Archive, Children's Film Society. Come on. We have merged these into one institution that does this. But let me give you one example so that you understand how difficult it is to actually shut these things down. So before 1991, when we were a socialist economy, we used to have an institution called the Bureau of Industrial Cost and Pricing. Now, this was an institution that was needed because, you see, the prices of many things like steel, cement, aluminium, etc. was not derived from market prices. Since, this was a socialist system, there was a government department that decided what the price of which grade of steel, etc. And you can imagine that this led to all kinds of interesting rent seeking, because even 1 rupee here or there in the pricing could make or break companies. So anyway, this body called BICP existed. Now 1991 happens. Now this body has no use because now all of these things are determined by market prices. So BICP, this unit, decided to rename itself
the Tariff Commission. Now, however, let me tell you, it had nothing to do with tariffs. Because you have to understand, what is tariffs? It's basically customs duties and things like that. Now, how is customs, like I was in finance ministry, so I can tell you how customs tariffs are decided. It's decided effectively between the commerce ministry and the finance ministry, because that's where the indirect tax guys sit. So those are two guys and the relevant ministry. So it's something to do with pharmaceuticals or chemicals or whatever the department is, maybe that guy will also be involved. The Tariff Commission has never been a part of this process. And yet this particular body continued to exist till 2022. So for 31 years, it continued to exist and had a head who had the rank of Secretary to Government of India and had 130 or something spots, but actually about 70, 80 people working in it. And for 30 years, this unit did not do anything useful. So when I, by chance, discovered this institution and wrote a note saying that it should be shut down, I got the head of the institution got very annoyed with me and complained to me to various people, including to the cabinet secretary, saying that, I was an evil fellow trying to shut down that department. Now, I don't understand why, because quite frankly, all of them are government servants. Not a single one of them was going to lose their job. They were just going to reallocate to some other ministry, including the lady who was the head of this institution. And yet there was great emotional attachment to this institution that had literally done no useful work for 31 years. So I'm pleased to tell you that in 2022, we finally shut it down. And so there are now 2 empty floors in that Lok Kalyan Bhavan behind Khan Market, that ugly grey building. There are now 2 empty floors there. So if you find some good use for it, let me know. Now, the purpose of this entire lecture was to show you that there are all these small nuts and bolts process reforms that need to be done. This is not just true of the Indian government, it's true of the state government, it will be true of the local governments. It will even be true of this institution. If you look around, I'm sure there are dozens of processes inside the Zaverian system that needs to be cleaned up and updated. This is something we should naturally do all the time. And indeed, businesses do this kind of thing as a matter of course. For whatever reason, this is not done as a matter of course in governments. And I'm not just blaming the Indian government. This is true worldwide. So when I began to investigate this matter and began writing about it systematically, I was quite surprised how little literature there is worldwide on this. It's almost like some sort of an abandoned field of study. And yet, such a lot of our efficiency gains that you're seeing, this growth that you are seeing today of the Indian economy is coming from these kinds of changes. I've just given you, a smattering of these. There are literally hundreds and thousands of these small changes that have happened over the last 10 years. Thousands of outdated laws have been gotten rid of, for example. Just like that. And so, as a result of which the system begins to move a little bit more efficiently than it used to before. There are still many thousands of things to be done. I am doing my generation's work. Your generation will hopefully will be doing, and your grandchildren will also be doing process reforms. There is no end to them. You can always make the system go a little bit better. But what is important is that every generation of people, societies, governments, etc., have to pay attention to this. These are not cool things that necessarily hit the newspaper headlines, but all of these small changes do add up, and cumulatively, I would argue they are even more important than structural reforms. In fact, even for structural reforms to work, very often you need to use this to keep improving. For example, the GST, yes, the structure changed, but to actually make it work, it required several iterations of small changes along the way till it finally began to work. So this business of process reforms is very, very important. And the purpose of this lecture is to hopefully get you to understand the importance of it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has any. I'll stand. I'll stand. It's easier. I can see everybody. If somebody can switch off the presentation, yeah. I'll just, yeah. So any questions?
Any question, over to you now,
Yeah.
student body. Feel free, raise your hand, then the mics will come to you. Yeah, go there, Tahir.
Good morning, sir. Will the automation of AI will impact the job markets in India?
The answer to your question is absolutely. Artificial intelligence is here. It's going to cause all kinds of changes. However, I don't think we should fear it. It is like any other tool. It will cause disruptions, but will also create opportunities. And whether we or not we grab those opportunities, those changes will happen anyway. It would be like saying, will the internet impact our lives? Of course it will. And there are many jobs that may have existed or got disrupted because of the coming of internet. Yes, it did. But was it on balance a good thing? Did it create more jobs? Yes. So I would argue that artificial intelligence is something that will be very disruptive. But in every disruption comes an opportunity. We have one big opportunity in India specifically, in that since we are going through our growth spurt now, we have, relative to other countries, much fewer legacy systems that are pre-artificial intelligence. We also have a younger population that is entering the workforce at a time when this thing already exists. So in a sense, we shouldn't try to save the old jobs. We should embrace this and grab the new jobs. An important part of artificial intelligence is also that it is, to the most part, not threatening low skill jobs. It is actually going to disrupt the jobs of relatively more educated people. Lawyers, for example, right? Now, this class of people, one, have more resources and they are more educated. So effectively, they have the capability, I would argue, of making this transition. I do not see any excuses for this. So I think as a country, we should grab this opportunity. We should be the center of a lot of this AI innovation ourselves. And in fact, much of the innovation done even by American companies is actually happening in India, in their offices in Bangalore and so on. What I think is the real issue is not about jobs, these disruptions, etc. That is not really my concern. I think we will rather do well if we retain a positive mind about it. My real problem with AI is with the following problem. That AI has the ability to basically, because it's self-generating and emergent, it can begin to do things which are outside of human control or human monitoring, potentially. And even in activities that are seemingly benign, it may begin to do things when in ways that is harmful to human beings. Now, of course, the obvious one everybody will now quote is this Gemini fiasco of Google with political bias. But that is not the only thing. I mean, many things can happen. When you're running entire systems based on AI, suddenly your electricity supply could be busted for some reason which you don't understand. It could connect through to something which you didn't want to connect through to. And I'm not just talking about obvious things like, obviously you don't want your AI to be running your nuclear button, but it could be something utterly benign that it begins to manipulate and you don't understand. So it requires some restrictions and governance that is required ex ante before it does these things. And there is a big debate on this worldwide. Elon Musk is, of course, one of the people, despite developing or a lot of the AI tools, he's very much talks a lot about how it can be, AI can do dangerous things because it may begin to take over our lives if we don't pay attention. So there's a big debate about regulating AI. And I'm actually one part of that debate myself. But before I get to what I think should be done, let me explain what is the current approach. The current approach to AI has the following things are being done. One is the approach of the US and UK, where they have spoken a great deal about the dangers of AI and so on. The President Biden has even issued a advisory paper and so on. But if you read into it, basically what they're going for is self-regulation by the companies themselves. Now, there is some advantage to it because it means that the companies can more or less do very unfettered innovation. But self-regulation, as you all know, is a dangerous thing. Because in the end, self-regulation at some level is no regulation at all. And so this is a problem, and I think this Gemini episode clearly shows you the dangers of it. And in fact, despite the obvious problems that it has, there is no consequence to Google of doing this. It's a different matter that it got slammed by everybody on social media, so people are going back at it. But this is, the errors it had were obvious in your face of political bias and so on. In many cases, it will not be so obvious till much, much later, and it will get hardwired into it before you find out, and nobody will be in charge. So I don't think this self-regulation will work. It doesn't work anywhere. There's no reason it will work here. The next approach is the European Union approach. The European Union goes for a top-down bureaucratic regulation control system. And here what they do is they put different kinds of AI depending on their risk perception of that thing. Now there is a problem even with this approach, because you see, AI is going to develop in all kinds of directions. We have no way of predicting how it will develop. Now ex ante, it's very difficult to know which one is dangerous and which is not dangerous. Now it's obviously, as I said, nuclear weapons is an obviously dangerous place. But other than that, it's very quickly unclear how AI will respond if you let it grow in its own right. So what may appear like an entirely benign usage of AI may evolve in its own way, speak to another AI system, and then begin to do other things which are out of human control. And a very benign usage may do something. I'll give you one example. Supposing you give an AI system the thing that eliminate cancer, okay? Go through the entire global digital system and operationalize it to eliminate cancer. AI could take it in its head that the best way to do this is actually to eliminate all humans, right? That would eliminate cancer completely. So I'm just giving an extreme example, but I'm just pointing out to you what happens when you allow a system which is self-generating to just run in its own line, because it could interpret instructions which are benign instructions in a completely non-benign way. So my view is that the European Union's effort is also going to fail, because very quickly the bureaucrats of the European Union will not be able to tell what is going on. After all, they are, anyway, if you are an AI expert, why are you sitting in Brussels? You should be sitting in Silicon Valley. So most of these people will not understand how this is going to evolve, and they will lose control of it. Then there is the Chinese way, where there is no regulation. It is just pure, direct, straight control, right? They don't tell you how exactly they're doing it, but basically the state, through some very non-transparent way, is supposedly keeping track of AI. Now even that, as we saw with the case of the Wuhan labs, can break down catastrophically. And because there is no internal feedback system inside their own system, it will go very well for a while and then have these catastrophic breakdowns just when you don't want it. So I don't trust the Chinese system either. So what should we do here in India? Now we are ourselves struggling with this whole thing. We had a notification recently from the government and so on. But we understand that this is not going to solve anything either. So we now need a other system. And I have proposed a paper, you can read it on the net, on using a complex adaptive system framework for regulating AI. So what is this? Sorry, I'm giving a long answer, but it's rather important. Basically, complex adaptive systems are systems which evolve in unpredictable ways. Okay. Now, what are other complex adaptive systems that you use? A financial market, for example, is a complex adaptive system, right? It can, financial markets where in 10 years time the Sensex will be is very difficult or in fact impossible to predict. So we have already evolved systems of regulating such complex, adaptive, unpredictable systems, specifically financial systems. So why don't we use that as one way of doing it? So I'll give you one of the implications of this. One implication of this is that you have to set ex ante the skin in the game. IEX, you have to already say ex ante who is responsible when things go wrong. That's a very important way of ensuring that whoever is dabbling in AI right up front knows that they are responsible. Right now, what happened? Google is not taking responsibility for what happened in Gemini. But in financial markets, if there is a scandal, if something goes wrong, the board of directors is held responsible. Ex ante, they are told that the management and the board of directors of the company are responsible, right? Just an example of one of the things. Similarly, you have in financial markets circuit breakers, basically a manual override. So you have to embed in AI systems manual overrides and choke points where they have to take human permission to do the next step. So you have to embed this and you have to do it. That's part of the regulation. You then have to create breaks in the system so that not every system can talk to every other system. Now everybody in the world wants to argue for the internet of everything. I'm sorry, very dangerous idea. I would argue you need to have fire breaks. Like in a forest you have fire breaks, you need fire breaks. Because you should assume from time to time parts of the AI system will blow up. All that you need to ensure is that the entire system will not blow up with it. Now this comes with the cost that you will never have the internet of everything or the AI of everything. Human beings will ensure that we will. So there's a whole range, there's a whole paper, you can read it in the ESEPM website. I'm just giving you a long answer to a short question, but hope that answered your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes. Tahir. Introduce yourself and ask the question.
Good morning, sir. So myself, Priyanshi Sahu from SS Jain Subodh College. Sir, I want to ask that as you have said, 0.27 paise reaches to the poor from 1 rupees which were granted to them. So won't it be the same path we are taking as the other developed nation took? Because the poor are...
No, so this is exactly the point about the DBT system. Now the whole money gets there. Because the money is sent. If you are the beneficiary, it goes into your account. I can see it goes into your account. So 100% transfer happens now. Now, afterwards, your local headman may force you to give him some money, but the money has reached you. This, the DBT system has ensured. 100% goes. Now, of course, there's still some scams will be happening on the edges. New kinds of things will happen. But the old system of, blatant fake registers, duplicates, etc., almost all of that has been eliminated. Now, there are really other kinds of problems that may have come, but that old 27 paisa reaching the bottom has been substantially resolved by the use of DBT.
Thank you, sir.
Last intervention. Yeah.
Good morning, sir. I'm Shantanu Mukherjee from Galgotias University. I'm a participant of this conference. My question is, you mentioned about the Legal Metrology Act 2009. That one. Here you, I saw in the packages, it is mentioned that the price of the 1 gram. So can you please tell me how it will beneficiary, we can make ourselves beneficiary, or what we have to know as
What you're saying is that there's all kinds of things in the packages which make no sense, or the average consumer cannot understand. And you're absolutely right.
Yes, yes.
That is the point I'm making. First of all, different states still have different rules. Many of those rules are complicated. A lot of it is of no benefit to the consumer. And yet there are these complicated rules that are there. And then if the producer makes some mistake on those complicated rules, many of whom are entirely of no use, you will then get that first penalty. And then if you get a second penalty, then you know what happens. They are basically you're now stuck forever paying bribes to somebody, some inspector somewhere. So this is the whole problem. And I'm trying to both simplify the rules and to decriminalize them to some extent. Now, you cannot 100% decriminalize them because, there is a good reason why metrology rules exist. So there are people who do genuine scams. But so you do need to have some strong measures, but they need to be graded and the rules need to be simplified such that only genuine cases are prosecuted. And the current system, which mostly is used to harass entrepreneurs, is stopped.
As a consumer, how it will help us?
What will?
The
The Metrology Act. Well, it helps you by making sure that if somebody has said he's sending you something of 500 grams, it actually is 500 grams. That if he said that, on the label, if it says, that this is very healthy for you and lots of protein, that you can read the label and see whether it actually has those proteins and actually helps. So there is a good reason why. Otherwise, people will sell you something, tell you they're selling you something and you actually get sold something. So there is a good reason for weights, measures and labeling rules to be there. That I'm not arguing against. All I'm saying that, look, they need to be simple. And the way they need to be set up is that it serves the consumer and it doesn't serve the interests of the legal metrology inspectors, which is what essentially happens today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The last question.
Okay.
On what monopolization has gone into the telecom sector now. As BSNL public sector, we were all consumers, we were beneficiaries. Unfortunately, now it is going into one particular sector, which will affect the price level, also the common consumer level. What is your take on that reform?
So, till the 90s, of course, there was only, this was a state monopoly. That state monopoly was broken into MTNL and BSNL. BSNL is the most of it. So there was a state provider. It was hugely inefficient, as you will remember. You had to bribe somebody to get yourself a landline. Now, from the 90s onwards, you began to see private players came in, Airtel, later Vodafone, even later Jio. There were some other players as well which got sucked up along the way. And that was a revolution. Suddenly there was telecom available everywhere, 3G, 4G, very, very cheap rates, and so on. So this particular process of opening up and liberalization has certainly been a huge benefit. All of you in this room who are using your phones are running it essentially on private provision. BSNL still exists. If you want, you are all welcome to use BSNL. But except if you're living in some very remote part of the country in Ladakh or some such place, you are probably not using BSNL system. Now, as a country, we have decided to keep a public provider, partly as a competitor to the private players, and also because in certain parts of the country, that is the only system that works. So there is a security angle to owning it. But let me point out that it is not a cheap hobby. BSNL runs up huge losses, and you can Google this up, and the government has to essentially cough it up in some ways. Now, of course, some part of it is because of, we can waive it because it's fees for airwaves. So in a sense, it's one pocket to another pocket. But the fact of the matter is BSNL still remains very inefficient. So the fact that there's a private providers of these things is unequivocally a good thing. Your problem, I think what you're answering is Jio becoming too dominant? I think you were very coy about asking this, but let me say it clearly. Yes, it is something that we need to be concerned about and watch. And that is why there is something called a competition commission, whose job it is to make sure that these monopolies do not evolve. So far, there is still another player, Airtel, and there is Vodafone as well, although it is a much smaller player. And, it has had many problems in the past. But should a situation arise where there too much dominance of one player and there is evidence of price gouging as a result of that monopoly, then there is something called a competition commission whose job it is to make sure that this sort of thing does not happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful talk. The Internal Quality Assurance Cell, popularly known as the IQAC, is the backbone of any institution of higher education. The quality of an institution is reflected in its vibrant and dedicated IQAC. The IQAC of St. Xavier's College, Jaipur, constantly strives towards perfection, and its efforts are reflected in the newsletter that it brings out to showcase the quality education imparted at Xavier's. We now request the dignitaries to please release the latest issue of the newsletter. I also request the newsletter team to please come up on the stage. Be mindful, be positive, be true, be kind, be grateful. It is time we express our gratitude to our honorable chief guest and keynote speaker for consenting to our humble invitation and adding luster to our academic endeavor. May I call upon Reverend Father Arokya Swami S.J., Rector and Manager, and our Principal, Reverend Father Professor S. Xavier S.J., to present a small token of our gratitude to our chief guest and keynote speaker for today, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, Member, Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister. As we conclude our inauguration ceremony, we would like to extend our profound appreciation and indebtedness to our chief guest and keynote speaker for sharing his valuable thoughts with us on the theme of the conference and blessing us with his presence. I would also like to extend our gratitude to the management for always encouraging and supporting all our intellectual pursuits to reach higher and helping us organize this timely thought conference. May I also thank all the knowledgeable resource persons, delegates, socially responsible entrepreneurs, scholars, and students who have come from the length and breadth of the country and beyond for braving all the odds and becoming a part of this conference. Thank you, one and all. We now break for tea and quickly come back for intellectually stimulating panel discussion on Envisaging Viksit Bharat at 2047. Scientific and technological, environmental and developmental perspectives. For dignitaries and paper presenters and registered participants, the tea will be served in the North Quadrangle. For rest of the students, it is room number 321, just outside the auditorium on the left as we move outside. Thank you.
Faculty members, kindly help them out. Room number 321. The registered participants, kindly go down fast to the quadrangle. Then we'll have our tea. Please interact with sir that time. Have your questions, unquenched questions answered during that time too. Thank you. Thank you one and all.